Welcome back to the ZeroW Podcast, where we talk about lifting, coaching, and more. You can learn more about ZeroW by going to www.zero.com.au. That's Zero with a W. We are also proudly sponsored by Establishment Coffee. Head to establishmentcoffee.com.au. Use the code 025 for 25% off and free shipping. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe. That's what all the cool kids say. And if you're on Spotify, hit that 5-star review. We love it. Enjoy the show now. Welcome back to the ZeroW Podcast. Today we have special guest, Scott Meiklejohn.
That's pretty close.
Where's that originate from?
James's next holiday destination, Scotland.
Scottish. You still have family over there?
No, we're actually Kiwi. We moved from Scotland to New Zealand.
I didn't know that.
What did your ancestors do?
They were boat builders.
Do you believe in Nessie?
Were they boat thieves?
Probably. I
always want to hear like juicy stories of how people's ancestors got here, like what they did. But
well, I think, and I could be stuffing up the dates and stuff, but didn't New Zealand give out like a bunch of free land when it was like first colonized and stuff like that?
I don't know about giving it out.
Sorry. Maybe that's
well,
the juicy
they
part
stole
I'm
it
looking
first
for.
and then shared it with the people they stole it with.
So maybe we did steal a bunch of land. Maybe that is what happened. But no, they moved around that early time to New Zealand, and then my grandparents were the first Aussies to come over.
Yeah,
New
nice.
Zealanders come over.
All right, next question. How long have you been spotting and loading at APL comps?
Actually, many years.
Sorry, there's a bit of profiling going on here. He sees bald, he sees beard, he assumes spotting and loaded.
Bald, beard,
jacked is the compliment.
I'll take that. I don't have any tattoos yet, though, so the second I go down that pathway, then it's just...
It was lost.
I love seeing the old photos of you and Colin
Oh,
when you had hair.
such a stitch up. He put that up. I swear he put that up just to mess with me. The other day.
I'm curious because, like, I personally, and my opinion doesn't matter, I think you look better bald.
Well, thank you.
Like, I think it makes you look wiser, tougher. Everything about it, in my opinion, looks better. Do you prefer yourself bald or with hair?
I'd prefer to have the option.
Yeah, I guess. Fair. Fair.
No, I've learned to accept. I've learned to accept it. I think there's always that like awkward phase where you're like slowly going from like a 4 to a 3 to a 2 to a 1, and then you just eventually shave it.
I'm going to join you again soon, Scott.
Yeah.
I go through phases where I'm sick of having hair.
Yeah, I thought you were one of us for a while.
Yeah. Well, that actually, some people were like, "Oh, I didn't know you had hair." I'm like, "What?"
One of us. All right. Well, this wasn't the intended subject of the podcast.
So, yeah.
Scott, as you know, we do a little thing, grateful in quotes, here at ZeroW. What are you grateful for this week, my friend?
Well, I am somewhat prepared. So I think for me, I'm grateful for this time of year. We're about to go into the Christmas to New Year period. And for someone who always finds it hard to take time off and relax, and I think everyone can sort of feel guilty sometimes about that. I think it's a great time of year because everyone just switches off. And yeah, there's just a collective relaxation.
Yeah, I like that. You get to see people's softer side come out when they're not stressing out about work or life or whatever they're doing.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is always good. Meg, what about you? What you got?
I'm grateful for you and the breakfast you've been making me. I just wanted to show everybody a photo of my breakfast this morning.
Nice.
It's a smiley face. And that's been making my life a lot easier, so very grateful for that.
It was accidental. It was meant to. I'm trying to learn how to make omu rice omelets.
Oh,
do you know what that is?
Where you twirl it with the chopsticks? And
No. Omu rice is like. I'll show you a video of after, but it's like it looks like a football, and then they split it in the middle, and it goes psh, and opens up.
Oh yes, I've seen them. Yeah,
it's the world's hardest omelet to make, and I've become obsessed with watching these videos on omu rice.
Well, you might be one of the best cooks I know. So.
Well, I see it as a challenge. I have to learn how to do it. I don't have the right tools though, so I'll get there.
Good tradesman never blames his tools, but that's fine.
I'm not a good tradesman, so I'm glad you called me out though. What do you got?
What am I grateful for?
Yeah.
I'm gonna piggyback off what Scott said. I'm gonna say I'm grateful for this time of year. You know, your friends and family, you all get together. A lot of people don't have family, but when all your friends and family get together, it's a pretty nice feeling. So I like Christmas time because I get to see people I don't usually see throughout the year, but we always make an effort to catch up every year. So it's cool.
Do you reckon it hits different as you get older as well?
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
I called my brother this morning on the way to the gym, and I don't talk to him heaps. I talk to we're not estranged or anything, but just hearing my brother's voice, one of them, I've got two brothers, it just hits a bit different as you get older.
Yeah.
I am grateful this week for the Mackay team. Meg and I just spent a weekend up at a place called Long Island in the Whitsundays with Team Mackay for their Christmas do. They invite us for their Christmas party every year, and it's never worked out until this year. So it was great to hang out and relax with them. Any interactions I ever have with them is always around work stuff, and we didn't actually talk that much about gym stuff or work stuff while we were up there. I mean, I would say 95% of it was listening to Khan talk shit. And, it pains me to say this out loud in public because I know I'll never hear the end of it, but you can't not be happy when Khan's around. Khan makes everyone feel good, so it was good.
He's the man.
He is.
I love that bloke.
He is. But the whole team was heaps of fun, and it was just a chill time.
Yeah, where is Long Island?
Near Ellie Beach.
Near Early Beach.
Yeah, very, very short ferry ride off of Airlie Beach, and there's nothing else on the island. There's an abandoned resort, and then the newer version of that resort, and there's essentially nothing to do. All the activities were shut down. Fishing was shut down, tennis was shut down,
Barbecue was broken. So we were really forced to just spend time with each other.
Oh, that's cool.
Which was nice.
Yeah, mad.
We snorkeled a little bit and jumped on the paddleboard and stuff. That was cool.
I saw all the videos of you guys jumping off. Meg, did that hurt?
Yeah, I was bleeding, James. I have a gash.
When you watch them and you watch people fall off, and then I'll watch you, I was like, fuck.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's good.
That was sick.
All right, Scott. Hendry, you got your notes open. Quote of the week.
I do. So, quote of the week is an old ancient Chinese one. I don't know who wrote it, but whatever. It's called, "Real knowledge is to know the extent of one's ignorance."
I like it.
It's crazy that it's in English.
Yeah, I know. Hopefully the translation was right. But yeah, so essentially, I think that knowledge arc, or the second you can really start learning, is when you're willing to understand the limitations of your current knowledge.
I agree. I think intelligent people aren't just smart, they're always learning.
Yeah, it's a case of the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. It's that whole Dunning-Kruger thing, right?
Yeah, and I think it brings an element of humility as well with it.
For sure.
I like.
For sure. I think the more someone becomes an expert as well, the more they appreciate other people's, I guess, where they are in their own journey of mastering something.
Do you feel like when you become an expert, you guys have a responsibility?
I do.
Oh, I don't feel like an expert in anything.
Oh, neither.
But yeah, I mean, again, it's like you're on a path to something, and you feel a responsibility to share that knowledge with others, which is why you became a coach in the first place, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I think back, Tom, bro. I always think back about my beliefs and why I think the way I do with powerlifting and coaching. And every now and then I'm like, fuck, everything I've learned has started from Thomas.
Yeah, and I had to learn it from somewhere. And I mean, Scott, you take on tons and tons of students at the clinic. You could very well just not do that. There's obviously...
It would definitely be easier.
Yeah, there's obviously some benefit to it, but I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, a big part of it is the same thing. You want to pass on that knowledge to the next generation.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously there was someone who did that for me at a certain point in time. So hopefully we can do the same thing. But I also feel like just being in and around that environment a lot and having students ask you questions helps to further solidify your thoughts on subject matters too.
Yeah.
If you can explain something, then generally that means you've got a pretty good understanding of it.
I know we're doing the quotes, but you just reminded me. That's why I love the kids development program stuff so much, because I froth it when people walk past a 9-year-old benching, sitting their brace, pulling their shoulders back and down. Everyone's like, what the fuck? That's a proper bench. Or when Geordie lifts, or Boris, and it's a good looking lift, and they're 15, 14 years old, and it's like, sweet, I'm glad that I could share that with them to teach them how to shape the way they lift.
You know Geordie's like 23 now.
Yeah, I was just thinking,
looks it,
Geordie.
No, he's talking about a different Geordie.
Little, I call them both Little Geordie.
Little Geordie. What's your quote, James?
One I prepared earlier. Growing old is mandatory. Growing up is wrong one. If we don't change, we don't grow. If we don't grow, we aren't really living.
Yeah.
Nice. Meg, what you got?
I've got a Chinese one as well. Having a dog is a lot of getting up after you just sat down.
Sounds like my toddler.
Wait, say that again.
Having a dog is a lot of getting up after you just sat down.
Can we have the Mandarin version?
Oh no.
Go, try.
Can't. I couldn't. Hang on.
Carly sang in Mandarin for you all weekend.
I can't say this in Mandarin.
Give it a crack.
Well, bujidao, which means I don't know.
Oh,
Nice. Mine is pressure is a privilege. It means things are expected of you.
sheesh. I like it. I
Yeah.
like it. All right. Should we get into it?
Yes.
Scott Meiklejohn. Am I pronouncing it right?
Yep, Meiklejohn.
Scott Meiklejohn. Introduce yourself, brother. Tell the people who you are, what you do.
Well, so as you said, my name's Scott. I'm a physiotherapist. I've been a physio for 12 years now. And yeah, probably in the last 5 or 6 years, sort of gone a bit more into that specialty of working with strength athletes, mostly powerlifters, but a few strongman and ollie lifters and stuff like that.
Did physio start for you before strength training, or did strength training come first? Because you were into footy, right?
Yeah. I played a lot of team sports growing up, soccer, rugby union, that sort of stuff. Training definitely started. Oh, they probably started while I was at uni, actually, as a physio. And on that topic of the student thing, that's always something I always try and say for my students to do is get into training. You know, they don't necessarily have to be into powerlifting, but I think just exercising yourself is so valuable for them to do.
So how did you fall into powerlifting? Obviously, you've been in strength training for a little while, but when did it turn into actual, I'm going to do a comp?
So I guess training for me started off the back of footy. So I was tiny. I was like 60 kilos and I was going from Colts rugby to opens. And so I had to put on some weight in the off season, and I didn't really enjoy training, to be honest, for the first like 4 or 5 months. And then somewhere along the line, I just sort of started developing a love for the training more so than the actual sport. And I think, like most people, my first sort of exposure to that was like watching Pump and Iron a bunch before going to the gym, and then watching like Kai Green YouTube videos and stuff like that.
Yes, perfect.
Yeah, and so getting into that, I absolutely loved bodybuilding, and then stopped playing footy just due to a bunch of injuries and shoulder surgeries and stuff like that. And so I was sort of looking for a sport at the time, and I met a dude in Fitness First in Toowong, which I think he was training, a dude called Sam. I think he was training at Iron Underground at the time. And he was sort of like, oh, you're reasonably strong for your size. Like, are you interested in doing powerlifting? And at the time, I had no idea what powerlifting was. So I asked him when the next comp was, and I think it was like in 8 to 10 days' time. So I signed up to, I don't know if you guys would remember, UQ has that little like scouts hall.
That's where I did my first PA comp.
Yeah, that's where I ended up doing my first one too. So
Yeah, nice.
signed up there. Had no idea.
Did you still have to put the deadlifts on the floor really gently so you didn't go through it?
Oh yeah, I don't think I was deadlifting enough to be concerned about that. But yeah, it felt like that shack was going to break at like any second. But yeah, so I signed up to that. No coach, no peaking, no programming. Didn't really know anything about it. I think I just read the IPF rule book like the night before the comp. And yeah, showed up. Ended up bombing out my first comp, but I think that's what happens when you have no idea what you're doing.
What'd you bomb on?
Squats, I just opened way too heavy. I think I didn't hit depth for like all 3 squats. So I think I opened on 210.
Oh, you were strong before you like.
Well, I didn't get it, so. But no, I was like a beltless high bar ollie lifter. So I think I had those like Ray-Ban 5mm sleeves. You know, the blue ones.
Sick.
Yeah, a pair of them.
Wait, what year is this?
2015. 2015 or 2016.
Okay, so they had new weight classes by then. Were you like 83s?
It was 83s, yeah. I think I was about 79 kilos or 80 kilos or something at the time.
Sick. Yeah, those blue knee sleeves. If you put them on today, because back then you're like, fuck, these help heaps. If you put them today, you're like, oh, cool, a pair of socks.
Yeah,
on my
literally.
knees.
Compared to like the Inzas now,
Yeah.
it's like, night and day. But I think I'd only had them for like a month at the time. I thought they were the coolest thing ever.
The red bands as well. They're about this big.
Yeah,
They're
so small.
This is so tiny. They just cover the kneecap.
I had the grey ones.
Oh, you had the flat. So you didn't.
I didn't see.
You passed the blue ones.
I passed the blue ones, yeah. I had the grey ones and then my orange Adidas shoes that I had to fax and order away to America to get. Do you guys remember Tommy Kono sleeves?
No.
Nah.
They were neoprene, but neoprene is like it's rubber, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the inside of it was rubberized, and it was like wearing a plastic bag. You just like turn into a sweat ball. It's crazy. Anyway, did that PA comp?
Yeah, so bombed that one. Ended up getting my bench and deadlifts. I think I benched 150 and deadlifted 230, I think.
That's crazy for a first comp.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't too bad, apart from the whole bombing thing. But genuinely, I really didn't mind, I think, because I signed up like just as to be a sport, you know, like it was just for fun. It really didn't faze me at all. Although I didn't end up doing a comp after that, maybe for another 12 months, because I was doing FIFO work at the time. So it was sort of hard to like actually line something like that up with.
As in FIFO Physio?
Yeah, I was doing like health and safety type stuff or whatever. But yeah, just looking after their injuries on mine sites.
Yeah,
Oh,
crazy.
wow, that's cool.
Yeah, so I did that for like 3 years, and then came back and started the business off the back of that.
So your first meet, your numbers were 210 squat.
X.
Ish.
Yeah, 210-ish. 150 bench and 230 dead.
Yeah.
What's your best numbers now?
In competition, 260, I think, hit the other day. 185 bench and then a 285 deadlift, I think.
Were those all the other day?
I think so. Or maybe I did 282. Something like that.
Can't remember. You pulled to win.
Yeah,
pulled
whatever,
one? Yeah.
whatever that was required. Oh, well, come second. Webby was unattainable.
Yes. Yeah. Do you remember, so you said you met this dude, Sam. Do you remember what his last name was?
No, I can't remember now, unfortunately. But that's actually where I met Webby, though, was at that comp.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so who's my current coach at the moment from Panthers. And he lent me a belt. He's like, mate, maybe you should try this for this following attempt. And I was like, oh, okay, that sounds like a good idea. It's been like this dickhead. But no, Panthers was at Milton at the time, so then I ended up training out of there.
So they went from Milton to that. There was like a place where they were next to a law firm or something. They were only there for like 6 months, and they went to West End.
Yeah,
So
it was.
were you with them through all that?
I think the first one was at Red Hill or Paddington, and then it went to Milton, and then it went to West End. So I wasn't there for the first iteration, but then I was there at Milton, West End.
Is Panthers where you do majority of your training still?
No, I haven't trained there much in years, but because he's ended up at Cooperoo now, so
Oh.
Quite a bit out of town for Scott.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
right.
I mostly train at Zero Brisbane.
Yeah, right.
How'd you find Zero Brisbane?
Just when they first opened, I was actually a reasonably early member, I think. But I was just training at home for a couple of years during COVID and stuff like that. I had a pretty good home gym. And then I did get sick of doing that, I won't lie. And then Zero Brisbane opened, so yeah, I became a member there.
That's cool. There's and you still get coached by Colin Webb.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Still has my
There's something Colin Webb gives me the vibe of if this whole building caught fire, he'd be the one to run in and save everyone.
He's a legend, man.
He definitely would.
He's a freak, eh? Like good at everything.
He is. He squatted 292 on the weekend, and he absolutely got stapled by like 280 in the gym the week before.
Yeah.
He probably had 300 on the weekend as
Yeah.
well.
He just seems
yeah.
tough, like
Super tough.
because he played schoolboys, Kangaroo Schoolboys as well.
Yeah.
So he's a really good rugby league player.
Good player, yeah.
And I saw the video of him when he snapped. So my first interaction with Colin was because he had a snapped Achilles. So he had the same moon boot that I had, and I kind of just got out of mine. So I spoke to him about it or whatever. I was like, oh, right, the same moon boot, whatever. And then I saw the video of him snap it at a strongman comp.
Yeah,
And
trying to
he's-
do the calf.
Yeah, but he was like smiling after it. You
Oh,
know, like
he's-
when you're like,
he's a nutcase.
yeah, I was like, mate.
So that surgeon was like, oh, yeah, you can do whatever you want when you're in the moon boot. And I was like, you should not.
I
have said
saw
to
that. He
this
was like
dude, man.
deadlifting in
He
that,
was,
eh?
he was
he doing yokes in it?
Yeah, he was
Yeah.
doing yoke carries in the moon boot. I was like, I was like, I know he said do whatever you want, but I think you're really taking this to like the next level.
He did not expect that. Eh? He was like, well, no one normally does that.
Well, he did that, the Arnold Strongman comp, and I think he was only out of the boot for like less than 6 weeks.
Oh my God.
So he was just training through it the whole time, then took the boot off, and yeah, they did those stone, I think it's like a stone to the steps where you like carry it up the steps or whatever. I was like, this could not be worse of a event option that you're trying to do.
Yeah, because that's what, when I remember snapping my Achilles, the hardest thing was going up and down stairs.
Yeah.
Because my ankle couldn't bend, so I couldn't imagine what it's like holding a stone trying to do it.
Oh yeah, it's nuts. But yeah, that's definitely standard Colin, I think.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, anytime I've ever stood up for PA and been like, it's not, you know, the problem has been the leadership. There's a lot of good people in PA. I only ever say that with Colin in mind. Or I say that the first person that comes to mind with any like other federations doing other comps is Colin, because people follow good people.
Wait, is he still in PA?
No.
He was
No,
with
but back in the
APU
day.
stuff, and then obviously that happened.
Anyway, back to you. This is the Colin Webb podcast. So when did you start your own practice? You're doing the FIFO for 3 years or so, and then you started your own practice?
Yeah, so I went and did FIFO pretty much to make money to be able to start my own clinic. And we started that at the start of 2018 in Toowong, and we're still in Toowong now. Granted, we're in a bit bigger of a location. But yeah, started in 2018, and yeah, it's just grown from there.
And what's the heart of the organization? Because you guys are a mix of not just physiotherapy, but a lot of exercise physiology as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a little bit different now, but back then, like, every physio clinic pretty much was just, like, multiple beds, ultrasound machines, like, maybe a Pilates reformer in the corner with, like, a couple pink dumbbells, which I hated. And so I really wanted to start my own thing and make it more like a gym. And, you know, around that time was sort of the emergence of exercise physiology as a profession. Which I think sort of bridges that gap between like your physiotherapists and your coaches. And so, yeah, I just did a vision of wanting to try and amalgamate those things and actually have it as a bit more of a quote-unquote performance center.
Yeah, it's one thing I love about coming to see you guys up there. There's not a great deal of lying on a table and doing table stuff. There's a lot of, okay, this is the problem. This is what you want the outcome to be. This is your chosen sport. Here's how we're going to build the connections between where you are now and where you need to be. There's a lot of that, like assessing movement and going deep into that. Because I think it's one thing I've found as a coach or a gym owner, or working with lots of people through that rehab pathway. People get injured, they see a physiotherapist, the physiotherapist prescribes exercises, but then the client just butchers them. So they just spend weeks and months doing these butchered versions of the thing that's meant to be helping them get to where they are. They go see the physio sticks some needles in them. At what stage did you sort of decide, okay, well, I don't want to go the standard approach of just like churning people in through beds and having 3 people going at once with needles hanging out of them, and a bit more hands-on gym-focused stuff?
It was probably around like 2015 or so. I was obviously pretty hard into my strength training at that point and enjoying it. And you could just really start to see, I guess, like the separation of what people were doing in the gym and then what health professionals were telling them. You know, like they were saying, oh, don't do this, blah, blah, blah. And then I would be doing it in the gym. And I was like, well, this obviously doesn't make any sense. And then people started seeing me a little bit out of the gym that I was training at, and the old model was like, 20-minute appointments, or you were doing like 2 people at once and things like that. And it just wasn't conducive to actually coaching someone or actually teaching them how to do an exercise. And so at that point, I was sort of on the edge of buying into the clinic I was working at anyway. And then I just sort of decided that, that was not the vision or not the style of clinic that I wanted to be a part of. And I thought I could see the direction of where our industry was going. And so, I decided to go take a job in the mines, because the only way you can start your own clinic is to have some cash. And, and then that was just a good 3 to 5 year plan before getting to kick off Effectus Physio, which has now performed well, but yeah.
So you weren't inspired by a person or a clinic that existed. You were just thinking, this needs to exist at some point soon. Yeah,
I guess so. Yeah, when you say it that way, I didn't really have anyone that was a mentor per se.
That's so cool. Like that you could just
Connect dots like that.
Yeah, like reinvent the wheel kind of thing and think, hey, this is something that needs to happen.
No,
Which is pretty brave in your field as well.
I don't know if I'd do it now that I'm a little bit older, to be honest. Like, just because, as you said, like that risk aversion probably increases as I get a little bit older. But I think it also came off the back of just not enjoying what I was doing either. So it's like I was either going to not be a physio anymore because I just wasn't enjoying it, or I was going to do it the way that I wanted to do it. So as much as, there'd be a financial incentive to do that as well, I just thought, like, screw it. If I'm going to do this, I at least want to be doing something that I enjoy.
Yeah, it can't be rewarding having people come back to you over and over because it's not working.
No,
you want people to not come back.
Yeah, which I know sort of seems counterintuitive to a business outcome, but no, that's exactly right. And like, I'm probably a little bit better these days, but you still take those things personally. Like when someone doesn't get better, like you care about what the outcome of your clients. And so, yeah, just knowing that you weren't delivering like the best possible service definitely is an issue.
Mm-hmm.
What's so formerly Effectus Physio, now Perform Well. What's the story behind the rebrand?
Well, a guy called Harley McIntyre, who was a exercise physiologist working out of Fitness First at the time. So he was a big sort of inspiration, I guess, to that as well. Both me and him had similar sort of philosophies on things. And so I sort of forced his hand a little bit and just opened a business next door to his work to try and convince him to come over full time. So he was then contracting out of our space under his own brand. And so, yeah, the more and more we became amalgamated, we were just sort of two businesses that are essentially working together, but we were still under two different names. And yeah, there was always that goal of amalgamating it, but it is always hard to do that off the bat. Like, Harley's got kids and a mortgage, so to ask him to just, cease his business and start a fresh business is always a difficult thing to do. So, yeah, we've always sort of had the vision of being one thing and operating as one thing, but we were just operating under two names for a while.
I want to come back to the injuries that you experienced. Did that provide, like with the surgeries you had, were you practicing as a physio at the time?
Yeah, I had a shoulder reconstruction when I was practicing, and I had to have 3.5 months off work, I think it was, or something like that.
Did you do your own rehab?
Yeah, I did a pretty bad job of it, to be honest.
Because that's kind of my next question, because like, I don't know, I find this with like nutrition stuff for myself. I know a lot about nutrition. I have a degree in nutrition. I coached it for years. I've coached hundreds of people, and I still do the dumbest shit.
I'm pretty lazy with it, I won't lie.
But do you think that helps you then empathize with the clients and find strategies to actually get people doing what they need to do?
Oh, absolutely. And I think particularly like when you see young kids, adolescents and stuff come in, like there was no way I was going to do any rehab that someone gave me when, like, if you're playing footy at the age of 18, I was not going to do any rehab that I was given. So yeah, it definitely gives me appreciation of that. But I think as well, just understanding like what people go through outside of the physical parts of it, like not being able to work for a while, not being able to train. You're normally used to playing sport, and that's where you get a lot of your, I guess, cathartic release from, and then all of a sudden you can't do that anymore. Yeah, it's hard. So I think that gave us a big appreciation of what it is, and having a lot of injuries myself, even though it'd be nice to maybe not have them, it's definitely made me a better clinician.
And as far as this pathway from injury to performance again, so in my perspective, I think that pathway is a little bit broken in the sense that, and I'm always make a case for therapists, because I think a lot of therapists get a bad rap, as in like someone will get injured, go see a therapist, then they maybe don't get the best outcome, or the therapist says, oh, you hurt your back deadlifting, we'll stop deadlifting. Like, oh, that therapist was shit. It's like, well, no, they're covering their ass. If they're not fully proficient in understanding powerlifting or deadlifting, maybe they specialize in, I don't know, feet or wrists or something, or a different sport. It's like, of course they're going to say, don't do the thing that hurt you, right?
Yeah.
And so in terms of that path from injury to performance, I think people need to appreciate the physiotherapist's role in that. So in my perspective, I see it as like CJ gets hurt, he goes and sees a physiotherapist. their job is to get him doing that activity pain-free. But there's a lot of scale in that activity. If that activity is squatting, if he's squatting 60 kilos pain-free, that's tick that box. But then there's a big risk in between 60 and 250 kilos that he squats. So what's your perspective on where you see physiotherapists sitting in that pathway?
Yeah, I think you're probably right. That's an area that therapists have copped a lot of shit around, and I think there's some truth to that as well. Like, physios are typically not great at scaling up and progressing exercises, and obviously with a sport like powerlifting, we're talking about taking that to the extreme too. You know, you're not talking about like just your average run-of-the-mill person doing like a bodyweight squat. So yeah, I think there's a sport-specific component there that's a hard bridge to cross, but I think that's also where that collaboration between the coach and the physio has to be there, because on both ends, you know, like you can't expect the physio to understand, I guess, the intricacies of the programming requirements, and vice versa. You know, the physio can't sort of just exit once that person does like a body weight squat and say, cool, I've done my job, see you later. But I think the emergence of like another profession in exercise physiology has sort of shown that I think it's a bit more of a spectrum these days as opposed to an individual profession. So instead of looking at it like you're going to go see a physio or see a exercise phys or whatever, it's just where does that person plot themselves on that spectrum from like low level care through to return to sport. And so just making sure you're aligning yourself with someone that, I guess, fills that section, if that makes sense. And that's sort of what we're trying to do at Perform Well. You know, we've got people in their different areas and different strengths, and just trying to fill that across that spectrum.
This might sound like a dumb question. How come I've only started hearing about exercise physiologists in like the last 3 years?
No, that's a pretty reasonable question. Like that profession's super young. Like, you know, when I graduated, like it was literally considered like personal training. You know, and to be fair, you know, physios conversely were always referred to as massage therapists. But yeah, I think like as evidence has sort of come out to show the benefits of exercise more and more and more, exercise physiology started as like chronic disease management. So, you know, yeah, people with cardiac conditions and stuff like that. And then obviously as exercise has become more and more profound for other musculoskeletal injuries, they've started sort of getting results and taking more of that market share, I guess. And so now you've just got this weird situation where you've got like two professions doing like large crossovers.
Yeah. Because did it start in Australia or New Zealand?
I think you're right. It's very big over here. It's not very big anywhere else.
Because I'm pretty sure it doesn't even exist in like the States.
No, they've got like
They do have it in Canada.
System. Yeah, Canada, Australia, and UK are similar in terms of how we lay out things. But yeah, the States have got their own methods.
What do you see? Sorry. What were you going to say? Oh, I was just going to ask, what do you see more through your door? People with sports-related injuries or like health-related injuries?
These days, personally, it's more sports. But like most physios, like even if you're a sports physio, you're still probably not seeing more than like 50% of your caseload is being directly sports. But I think these days probably 60% or so of mine would be powerlifting, maybe a little bit more.
Okay.
Yeah, and I suppose that's just, especially with the NDIS, how the world's turning, and with VA stuff and everything.
Yeah, and I mean, it is enjoyable, to be honest, to still do other stuff. Like, I really enjoy working with athletes and powerlifters a lot, but I think it's like most people, you do one thing just repetitively for 40 hours a week, it's probably going to get a little bit draining.
Yeah.
So it is nice to do different things. And, you know, you just learn as well, seeing different clients with different problems. I think it's like with coaching, there's a big element of if you can teach, I guess, just like a average person who has terrible body awareness how to do something, there's a huge skill set to that you can cross over to others as well.
Mm-hmm. The thing I've always found hard with physios, anything, is that, and we've spoken at length about this, but just the idea of, I think a lot of people have a pre-written expectation that you guys are supposed to know everything about every exercise and every sport, and it's not really part of your degree, right? It's really...
No, not at all.
You guys, what if you were to say you're an expert in something as a physiotherapist, not you personally, just like the profession, what is the actual role of a physio? Like, what are they experts in?
I'm probably going to butcher the explanation, but I think the explanation of physio is essentially utilizing exercise and other modalities to reduce people's pain and improve their function. So that's a pretty broad spectrum analysis. And like you said, like as a physio, like we don't really have specialties until you go back and do like a masters of sports or a masters of musculoskeletal stuff. So it's pretty broad. And so what you end up seeing, I think, is people who have experience in the sport, maybe playing it themselves, gravitate towards that and become, air quotes, experts in those areas. It's like, if you look at professional sports, a lot of ex-players who have then turned around to become doctors or physios, they work with those teams still. It's like, I know how to ride a bike, but I don't know shit about like elite cycling.
Do you see yourself as like a specialist or an expert in any specific field?
Not really. I mean, I think over time maybe that can happen, but I mean, I've only been working with powerlifters for like 6 or 7 years. I don't know if that qualifies as being an expert in anything.
It's pretty damn long.
Yeah. What's the?
It's hard though, right? Like, who is an expert in powerlifting?
Yeah,
like You could call someone like me an expert in powerlifting, but another expert that's got just as much time and experience might see things completely different because there's no book on this shit.
I was more so meaning along the lines of like I was thinking of people, like in S&C, Eric Cressy's like the shoulder guy. I was meaning more so that. Like, is there anything that you like really?
What body part do you like the most?
Yeah.
Well, I'm not technically a specialist in anything, but I definitely enjoy shoulders probably more so. And I think that comes from my own experience of having reconstructions and stuff. Like, it's definitely given me more of a passion for that.
That was going to be my next question. Is that the most common injury or concern that powerlifters come to you with?
No, I'd say lower back pain's definitely number one by a country mile. But I'd say lower backs, knees, and shoulders.
All right. Well, let's talk about lower backs. What do you personally see as? I mean, cause is a bit hard because at the end of the day, I mean, the cause of injury is essentially just overload, right?
Yeah, for the most part.
Which can be made up of so many things. It can be made up of, you're fatigued from programming, that's overload. You break down in technique, that's overloading that area, whatever. What are some of the commonalities or common traits that you notice about people presenting with back pain or injuries?
I think back's particularly interesting because all the tests for it are pretty shit. So like with your knees and stuff, you can do ACL tests and stuff, and they're reasonably accurate, whereas the lower back's pretty puss at being able to sort of differentiate individual sources of pain, which makes it both easy and hard. So hard in the sense that you can't often figure out the pathology specifically, but easy in the sense that often it doesn't matter. So you do come back to more of the things you were saying before around just total load management. And so obviously with powerlifting, it's a little bit easier to tell because most people will come in with a program that you can take a look at. And so that'll be one of the first things I'll do straight away off the bat, just see if there's any big flags that are pointing out. But that's often, analyzing someone's history, so how long they've been doing that thing for as well. So picking apart, I guess, their training history and training loads. And if there's nothing that stands out from there, then going more through their other components, lifestyle factors, recoverable markers, stuff like that. You will almost always find something there that's the cause, right? So say the training stuff looks pretty consistent, program's good, there's nothing there to indicate a problem, but this person lost their job a few months ago, hasn't been sleeping well, et cetera, et cetera. So there's often a bit of an explanation there that gives you a reason as to why everything went to shit.
When you're dealing with people with lower back pain, I'm just speaking from anecdotal experience here, which is especially disky sort of injuries tend to be one of the highest recurring injury pathways that I've seen in powerlifting. And I believe personally a big part of it is that people get an injury like this, they get a flare up, whatever it is, then they just go through a rehab process and then change nothing about their programming or their technique or their bracing or, whatever areas are lacking. They just get rid of the pain and then just go back to the same thing. And then they do it again. Like, oh no, I've done it again. What a surprise. Are backs more notorious in your practice what am I trying to say? Do backs tend to recur in people more often than, say, shoulders or knees? Or am I just seeing things?
No, you're right. I think, I don't know the exact numbers, but if you've had back pain before, you almost have a 100% chance of getting it again at some point in time. So I think this is probably where people need to shift their mindset away from thinking about getting rid of or fixing an issue and more of a management. That's not necessarily to say like ignore the things that made it worse, but I think that's sort of, if you can start to think a little differently about that, you can start to think of it in the long haul. You know, like, what am I doing over the course of 6 to 12 months for this issue, as opposed to I had this flare up, like you said, it settled, got back into training, but I just went straight back to the same thing that I was doing before and ended up in the same situation. And powerlifting's, you know, pretty useful to be able to look at that stuff, because for the most part, patients are pretty adherent. You know, like everyone who's into powerlifting really enjoys what they're doing. They're very consistent. They're usually pretty compliant, to be honest, like compared to other people. So you get a pretty good like diary and training log of what's going on. So it, you know, it is one of those things that actually is pretty manageable. You know,
do you think the compliance comes from people hitting like a rock bottom of sorts? You know, like start to look towards getting it better because it's gotten worse? Because I personally find it hard to inspire, say, a client who's just managing, let's call it a niggle, you know, even though you can kind of look into the future and see that it could turn into something a lot worse if they don't just address it easily with a bit of stuff like 5-10 minutes weekly before it gets worse.
Well, I think that's probably where it's a little easier for me than you to do that, because by the time they wind up seeing me, they probably can't do things very well. Like powerlifters don't really want to come see me unless there's a problem, you know. So I think compared to maybe the average person, I'll definitely take what they're saying with a lot more grain of salt, like a lot more serious. Not that I don't take the other stuff serious, but like what I mean really is like, yeah, for a powerlifter to come in and not be able to train properly for a sport that they love, it's giving them problems. And so I think for you guys as coaches, you're probably dealing with people having niggles all the time. If their training is still going reasonably well, it is probably hard for you to get compliance. Whereas for me, it's a bit, it's a little bit easier. And I guess I'm sort of saying it in comparison to like the average person who hates going to the gym. Like that's hard to get someone to want to do that.
Surely you deal with the other archetype of person that comes in at the sign of every little thing as well.
Yeah, there's like a few of them in powerlifting.
Well, that must be because I mean, we get it as coaches too. It must be an interesting from a therapist's perspective to deal with. I actually get self-conscious about it sometimes. You know, I've said in the past, I'll come see you and I'll be like, oh, the shoulder's been hurting. And you're like, does this hurt? I'm like, no. Does this hurt? No. Like, and then I start to want it to hurt. So you're like, does this hurt? And you're like, I think so. You know, I feel like I'm faking it. And I wonder, like, how do you deal with that when somebody passes every test but is still saying they present with pain and you just can't find it?
That's a good question. I think that's just sort of, I often give people a question back to themselves about, you know, well, what are you feeling it with? Why are you feeling this? Did it hurt with this? Oh, you're able to do this. So just try and get them to unpack the answer themselves a little bit, almost like try and incept their mind a little bit with the answer. But I guess it's just similar to you guys as coaches. It's not necessarily that one's bad or worse than the other. It's just understanding what that person is and then trying to find an answer or pathway to that rather than trying to get them to fit the other way.
I mean, that kind of opens Pandora's box in terms of like pain science. Then I'm sure I know you're a deep thinker. I'm sure you've gone down many rabbit holes around pain science, because I'm fascinated by the other end of that. Remember Nicole, who used to train with us, little Nicole? Like, she snapped her arm in half doing a bench press. So routine bench press, 80 by 3, snapped her humerus clean in half. But she's the kind of person that like doesn't have the same pain experience as the rest of us. So she wanted to continue the session. She didn't even realize she had literally snapped her humerus in half. Like, it must be interesting for you when you're going through stuff that should hurt and someone's like, yeah, I feel it a little bit.
Well, I like from a scientific standpoint, like strength training does lower your perception to pain. So like you definitely get quote unquote tougher by doing strength training. But like I said
some
before
of us
too,
do.
I think, you know, for someone to come in and see me as a powerlifter, if, you know, for them to sort of put that effort in knowing that their training's not going well, I do take it like, pretty seriously, because they're not going to come in otherwise if it's a mild problem. Like, not to say that doesn't exist, but I would say the percentage of people in powerlifting who are on that other end is quite low.
You know, I love all this pain science stuff. I love how people deal with and understand injury. It's funny you were saying about the backs before and that like recurring experience. Lower backs are funny because I feel like everyone is taught from a very young age that, oh, no, if you hurt your back, it's the end of the world. Like everything's like, oh, I threw my back out. I couldn't walk for 3 days. You know, it's all lift with your legs. Everything's around. If you hurt your lower back, you're broken forever. And I think anytime someone experiences a lower back injury for the first time, it's a bit of a like, holy fuck, what have I done? And anyone will know listening to this, if you've ever done like a facet joint or busted a disc doing a deadlift or something, that first pop or whatever, when you feel it or you feel a shock down your leg, you're like, uh-oh.
Yeah, I mean, even myself, like it's sometimes when you get DOMs in your lower back, you just instantly start thinking of the opposite. And you're like, nah, that's probably just DOMs. I'm sweet. But you don't ever think about that with your legs. You know, you're not like, oh, I blew my quad out today because it's a bit sore after the session. But I don't know, it seems to like just lower your confidence maybe more than other injuries.
Well, it's a little bit more debilitating. Like it's your lower back or your neck or...
Yeah, James does his every 6 months.
Definitely don't realize how much you use it to just like get out of bed in the morning.
Well, that's it. Like you do your shoulder and
show him that photo later.
Oh, yeah. Well, actually, no, Scott sent me...
sideways, yeah.
Yeah, so I messaged Declan that morning. And then Scott sent me some exercises to do straight away.
Yeah.
And it straightened me out. Did you guys see me get up just then?
No, I missed it, but I did see you.
You were pretty stiff.
Yeah, when I sit down too long, I stand up and I can't stand up straight.
Oh.
Yeah, my back's fucking...
Yeah, we should probably get someone to look at
that. Yeah, but...
Yeah, like back to what you were saying around, I guess, management over fixing it. It's the one thing we try to sell people on as well. If they come in with an existing back pain or injury, it's like, hey, we're not going to make this thing go away, but our job is over time to have you experience this less. And when you do experience it, have the pain last less time, get you back on your feet quicker. Like that's our marker of improvement. That's our progress from here is not never seeing it again, but making sure you see it less frequently and experience less pain overall.
Yeah, and definitely with backs, you know, like there is other injuries that do heal, obviously, and you won't necessarily get that issue again. But with powerlifting, it's very repetitive based injuries, like, you know, tendon issues in your knees or pec strains or lower backs. And, you know, that's happening in the areas that you're training to get better at the sport. And so, you know, there is a risk of that happening again. So, yeah, your approach obviously should potentially change if you can find anything or identify anything in your training that's been a risk factor. But conversely, yeah, like if you're going to be powerlifting for the next 10, 15 years of your life, there's a good chance that something like that is going to come up again.
How do you, sorry. No. I was going to say, how do you, so obviously for like high performance athletes or people chasing high performance, they obviously understand that being pain-free, you know, is almost impossible. And they understand that, like what we're talking about, you know, you're just trying to manage it. How do you bridge the gap with, like beginner or intermediate powerlifters or, you know, people that are new to this sport? How do you get them understanding the same thing? Because obviously when you're young and you're injured, you're like, fuck, like, this is never going to get better. Or if you feel a little bit, like when I first snapped my Achilles, I was younger, obviously. And as soon as I'd feel a little bit of pain in my Achilles, I'm like, fuck, it's not getting better.
That is actually a really hard injury to deal with, snapping the Achilles. But I think, like, maybe this is just my bias as I get older and stuff, but with powerlifting, like, it's a sport that you're going to commit to for a really long time. And so I tend to sort of be the opposite sometimes. Like, if someone is young coming in, I'll definitely lean more towards them taking their time with this rather than sort of rushing things. Whereas maybe a high-end athlete, whilst, you know, I'm still not going to rush them, but I think their opinion on how they want to manage it and their goals start to matter more. So I think from my end, it's a job of like almost being a consultant, like providing an opinion and educating that person and then letting them make that decision as to what they want to do.
Because, I mean, when it comes to high performance sport, or like let's talk about powerlifting, where do you sit on the statement that injuries are part of the game? Like, is that a given, or is it like, well, they can be, but they shouldn't be?
I think like any high-end, anytime you're chasing anything at a high performance, so the extremes of anything, it's probably not overly good for your body in the long run. But that's not to say that you have to accept like a high rate of injuries, because powerlifting actually has a pretty low rate of injuries compared to other sports. In terms of like injuries per hour that you participate in a sport, it's actually extremely low. And maybe that would start to diverge on that extreme end, you know, like if they only took the high-end athletes. But I think for a sport that has a lot of controlled variables, so we know when you can train, how you train, there's not like other body parts moving with you. I actually think it's a sport that, yeah, you can eradicate a lot of injuries from, or at least temper the outcomes of a lot of those problems. Whereas, yeah, with rugby, you could do everything right, and then someone just lands on your neck sideways.
Yeah.
We've spoken about this before because it's so unpredictable. Like the outcome's so unpredictable. Like everything in powerlifting is
So safe.
yeah,
It
it's
is safe, yeah.
It's very predictable.
Very predictable. You get a good coach, you know, controlled nutrition, you know, fairly controlled lifestyle variables. You know, it actually should be able to be controlled pretty well over a long-term course. That's not to say you won't get any problems, because, you know, even if that was possible to get rid of, like your NFL wouldn't have any problems, right? They've got all the money and endless resources, and they still get problems. But I think you can definitely make it quite low in this sport compared to other sports.
Is there much science on, I guess, injury resilience? You know, some people just seem to break easier than other people.
Yeah, I agree.
That's a good question. I actually don't know, but I do feel like there's a genetic component, right? Like on the extreme ends, there's like, I guess, people with different tissue quality. So, you know, how their connective tissues are made, for instance. So people are hypermobile, or people with other conditions like EDS and stuff. Their tissues don't respond as well and don't heal as fast and stuff like that. But that's down sort of one end of the spectrum where you can put like a diagnosis on someone to that. But my personal experience is there definitely would be a spectrum of that. You know, like it's unlikely that you just get quote unquote normal people and then people with this other end of the spectrum. It's likely that we all have a pretty large variance that's genetic. And I'm sure that we can change that, but I think there's probably a big factor there that's very hard to quantify. And in my experience, that has been the case with seeing people with injuries. There's certain people who are just like, you shouldn't have gotten injured. Like there's nothing that indicates a problem here, but they just seem to get 1,000 injuries.
Yeah. I'm always shocked at the variance between like how strong we are as humans and how fragile we are. Like I know a guy that was, you know, when you're putting plates on the barbell to do a deadlift and you lift the end up and slide the next one on. This was not a weak guy. He deadlifted in the 200s and he was going from 1 plate to 2 plates. And when he lifted the bar to put the next one on, he snapped his bicep off.
Oh.
Like complete rupture. Like I hear stuff like that, you know, someone doing something, a crazy injury, doing something that's harmless. And then you've got people like, you know, Coops throwing around 300 who's been relatively injury free. Yeah. He's had a few shoulder problems, but he's never had like a major pec rupture or any major, you know, tendon damages or anything like that. And same with Semler before him. He never had any really big injuries.
Yeah, no, I do think there's a big genetic component to that. And that's probably why even at the high end of like elite sport, there's still a lot of injuries, right? Because if that was able to be quantified, you'd think those people who have the most money and the most access to resources would be able to get rid of it otherwise. But I do think maybe what you do growing up, so people who played sport or stuff like that, or maybe, yeah, essentially like your tissue is going to adapt. Apart from just the genetics you have, they're going to adapt as you grow. So I do think that potentially that is a factor. I've got nothing to substantiate my claims behind that, but that's just my inclination. Like people who played a lot of sport growing up, maybe got into that sort of stuff younger. I don't know, they seem to have a degree of resilience. Maybe that's just like a mental component to playing sport as well, but yeah.
All right. Well, we're getting kind of towards the end of it. Do you guys have any more questions? I got another question.
Just a random one, but have you come across any sports that you found particularly challenging to work with, like so outside of powerlifting, or even just like certain cases where you were like, what the hell is going on, like boggled your brain?
I think I like CrossFit, but CrossFit is hard to work with, I won't lie. I think any extreme sport, so like endurance sports, can be hard because the mindset that's required to be good at that sport. I mean, if you're running marathons and stuff, like you're going to be in a lot of pain, right? Like all those ultra marathons. So I think those people are incredibly resilient. But as a result, they're hard to work with because it's hard to get them to rest.
Yeah, because that's the whole sport, time on legs.
Time on legs, and just they're used to hurting. They're used to being in pain, you know, and often those people are using it as well as a mental release as well, which, you know, a lot of powerlifters do too. You know, it's a big mental or a cathartic, release for them. But I think, endurance athletes are definitely hard to work with in that regard.
And it must be impossible to shake the mindset of, if I put myself through this, my body will adapt so I can do it again and again and again.
Yeah.
Holding back from experiencing the pain is probably in their head going to hold them back from progress and doing what they want to do.
Yeah, and I mean, it's probably worked for them up until this point, and then you're like, well, it's not working anymore. Can we try something different? But yeah, that's very hard to get them to change. And I would, on your topic before around people like with the pain science and feeling different pains, I do think it's easier to work, to be honest, with someone on that end of the scale than it is on the other end, because you can educate someone and slowly build them up. It's hard to pull someone back when they just don't want to pull back. And I'm sure that you'd get the same thing with probably coaching some of your elite powerlifters, like trying to control or rein those individuals in can be hard.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely.
I've just got this is a random question as well. So I probably bring him up once a week, but LeBron James, almost 40 years old.
Ronnie.
He's
my dog.
He's been very resilient in his 20 years. He's played in the NBA over half of his life.
Yeah,
so he's been very resilient, and he's had fuck all major injuries. And he spends over $1.5 million on his body a year. Like, what's your opinion on that? Is that just him looking after himself really well? Or is that the genetic component coming into it? Or, because I don't understand how he can still be so athletic and like all the steroid accusations or whatever, like, we all know people that do steroids and whatnot. It doesn't fucking make you a freak show.
Nah.
It doesn't do that.
And he's still a standout in his sport as well. So, whatever they're doing in their sport, they're probably all doing whatever.
And that's what I mean. He's almost 40 years old. His son's in the NBA now. Like, how do you...
crazy.
Yeah, how do you explain something like that?
I think, like you said, definitely a genetic freak, but there's probably generational freaks like him that maybe haven't played for as long as he has. So I think it's also a case of what we know now is vastly better than what we knew, say, 20, 30 years ago in managing injuries in sport. So there's a lot more money in that these days. So the last 15 to 20 years, the way you would rehab, or even S&C, for instance, like the management of programs and stuff like that, is vastly different in the last 15 years than prior to that. And so I do think that you're taking genetic freaks and then adding just better science on top of that. And so then you're seeing people being able to play for longer.
Yeah, because sorry, Thomas. Like I was going to say, the average age of sport now is creeping up as well, isn't it?
Yeah, again, I haven't looked at the stats, but it feels that way. I feel like people are playing longer, even though on paper that should be harder because the standard of athleticism is higher.
Yeah. Like if you look at I'm going to use the NBA as an example. Like still, some of the top 10 players, maybe over half of them, 35 years old. Kevin Durant, Steph Curry, 35. Like they're all getting older, but they're still, performing at the highest level. Haven't lost an ounce of athleticism.
We're in our prime, James. What are you talking about?
We're about to enter that era.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know. I just think it's...
Well, I know in my profession, like if you look at what physios do now and PTs over there, it's so different, right? Like compared to what it was 15 years ago. So I think they're just getting access to medical care that's just keeping them at a higher output for longer. That's what I suspect is the case anyway.
Yeah, right.
Does it bother you that they call them PTs?
I don't know. It's an interesting world, the what they do in America with that sort of stuff.
Yeah, because what's the go over there? Because I always thought, because they call themselves physical therapists, eh?
Yeah.
So that's just a physiotherapist?
I mean, essentially, yeah. If you were to look at the rehab, it would, they're essentially just meant to do the same thing. In Australia, we get some diagnostic skills that I don't think they get there. Maybe someone correct me if I'm wrong, but it's very medically driven there. So everything still has to go through doctors first to get referrals for scans or even to just call something a particular injury. Whereas over here in Australia, if you're a physio, you can still technically diagnose something. So there's a little bit of that early intervention part where it differentiates. And then as a result, I think you see people enter physiotherapists a lot quicker over here. Like people just go and see a physio without seeing their GP first, whereas it just doesn't happen as much over there. It's
a lot more out of reach generally.
Yeah, right.
You can, I mean, of course you can access it, but it's harder.
Yeah, it's just not they just doesn't seem to be the norm, I guess.
What's the craziest injury that you've ever had to rehab?
I I actually don't know off the top of my head, but probably like motor vehicle accidents and stuff like that would have to be at the top of that list, just where people are breaking like, you know, their bones in multiple places in their legs and stuff like that.
Yeah, hectic. If you were to give, you know, some general physio advice to the average powerlifter, so like a broad sweeping advice as to how to get the best outcomes and stay injury free, what would you say?
I reckon hire a good coach would be number one, probably Zero. Just to plug them. But no,
Nice.
but I think that's a serious point, because most of the time when people come and see me, you can see something in their program history. Not to knock any particular coaches or anything, but just like you can see that acute to chronic work-related ratio has gone to shit. So I think hiring a good coach, being honest with them, taking periods of periodization. Like I'm a big fan of taking time, not necessarily off training, but reducing intensity and then pushing again. And I think if you're looking at the sport, which over a longevity component, then you're going to need to do that. If you just go, you know, absolutely foot to the floor for the 3 years and then burn out, I think that's obviously a common thing that we see in powerlifting. And you know, you can get away with that style of intensity for a period of time, but I think to be at the top of any sport, you've got to be doing it consistently with minimal issues for 10 plus years. So I just say, look for the long run.
Awesome. All right. Any final questions for Scott? Scott?
Where can people find you?
I'm not exactly a big social media person, but in terms of posting, but you can find us on Effectus Physio. We definitely take a lot of bookings and stuff through that. So if you ever want to reach out, do anything online or face to face, you can reach me there.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Scott's been a key helper of Zero. He's also sponsored a lot of the major APL events and the Zero Pro in the last couple of years. So we're very grateful for Scott. Scott's worked with a lot of our top lifters as well. Scott's helped out Danny Grigsby, Colton, Theo, like a lot of the heavy hitters in Zero that you've seen. Scott's had his hands on physically or via the internet at some stage.
Virtually.
Yeah. So hit him up if you need help. Thank you so much, man. Appreciate you coming out.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Okay, bye. Thank you so much for listening to the ZeroW Podcast. If you want more information, head to our Instagram, @zero_weakness. Hit the link in the bio for all of our services and any information on upcoming workshops and events. Don't forget to leave us a 5-star review so we can have a broader reach and answer more people's questions. Thank you once more.